本当？見えないでしょ？どこにいるのかな？見えないよ。
What's good, Internet? It's November 15th, and you are listening to Waypoint Radio episode 523. I think it's 23.
Yeah.
We have a bit of an unusual show for you here. First up, we have a conversation with Obsidian's Josh Sawyer and Adam Brennecke, who are the directors on Pentiment and Grounded, respectively. I chatted with them last week about life at the studio under Microsoft and how that has changed approaches and metrics for success. And I also had one of the strangest moments of my career talking to Josh about Pentiment, so stick around for that. Afterwards, Ren and I are going to be talking about Pentiment, which you may have seen getting some rave reviews this week, from us included. And then Patrick and I will join Cado for a quick dip into the mailbag. And that will do it for today's show. But first up, what you're going to hear next is me chatting with Josh Sawyer and Adam Brennecke. So stick around. Today I'm joined by Josh Sawyer, game director on Pentiment. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And I just realized I made a note to myself to ask whether it's Adam Brennecke or Brennecke.
Adam Brennecke, actually.
Okay, Brennecke.
Yeah, there's a neck in Brennecke.
So you are game director on Grounded.
Yes, I'm the game director and producer on Grounded.
So first, I'm always curious about this. You know, a lot of times on the show, we talk about, what we've been playing lately, what new games we're into. And I'm curious, as people actively developing games, do you have time to do that? Like what does the gaming hobby look like for somebody doing it professionally, especially with in an era of like live games or games where development never quite stops?
Yeah, for myself, over the past year, there's not a lot of game playing going on. Whenever I have any sort of time, I'm usually focused on working on Grounded and trying to make the best game possible. So since we've released about a month ago now into our 1.0, I've definitely had a lot more free time to start playing more games. I've been checking out a lot of different things in my backlog, which is getting, bigger by the year, right? Yeah. So I actually have been playing Cado.
Okay.
That's something that a lot of us are fans of that game. It's kind of a completely different type of game than what we've been doing at Obsidian, but it's a lot of fun. But yeah, checking out a lot of indie games. I've been checking out, going back and playing some survival games. I did play a lot of Valheim, but even just going back and playing some Valheim. So yeah, a lot of free time now to check out and get inspired by what other people are doing in the industry and working on.
Josh, what about you?
Yeah, I don't. My game's not out yet, so I have not been playing very much. I bought Immortality because it's a very narrative-heavy game, and a lot of the people I follow on Twitter that I respect as game writers seem to be really, really into it. Also, a friend of mine wrote on it, so I feel like I really need to check it out. But I haven't really played it yet. I saw that there was the new IO Interactive announced Hitman Freelancer, which looks really cool. So that made me dig out Hitman 3, and I started going back through that again and goofing around. But actually, because we've been in this big push to get Pentiment done and shipped, in the evening, I just kind of want to chill out. And so in October, I spent a lot of time, most nights I was watching a horror movie. So going through Criterion Channel had a ton of great 80s horror movies, also on HBO and stuff like that. So I was just cruising around and just vegging out, watching some stuff that I had watched before and then some new things. So that was that's how I've been decompressing from the rush to get the game out.
That is a great way to spend October. I didn't have a lot of time to do the horror movie marathon thing, despite the fact that Criterion is always tempting me. Like, I have the most fear of missing out with Criterion, I think, because it's not just that they rotate the collection a lot, but it's stuff that I wouldn't even know to look for. Like the curation is like, oh, here's an awesome movie that came out when you were like 3 or 5 and you never heard of. And the minute it's gone, I'm probably going to forget about it until the next time they surface it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it kills me every month. So, turning to game development a little bit and where things are at for y'all, I am curious, you're both leading projects that are very much post Microsoft acquisition projects in a lot of ways. And I think I'll be talking about this with Fergus soon as well. But one of the things that I wanted to ask about is that I know that, time was there were a ton of studios that had a lot of development contracts for major publishers, but it was always a very hard existence for studios like that. And a lot of the studios that existed that did that kind of work in the 90s and early 2000s don't exist anymore. They folded up or they were acquired ages ago. And with that, there was always sort of the process of pitching games to studios and trying to find like if someone could buy into the vision. And I'm curious if does that come back a little bit in this age of like in an Obsidian situation where on the one hand you're under the umbrella of like what you call like a mega publisher, but on the other hand there's got to be an internal pitch process. I'm sure like it's still always challenging. It seems to me, or it seems like it would be challenging to sell people on a quirky, weird passion project. And yet here we are. So I'm curious, like, you talk me through a little bit about like maybe the pitch process now that you experience versus like other versions of it you've seen in other areas and other relationships between the people holding the money and yourselves.
Yeah, it's definitely a different world that we're in now while we're in the Xbox family. I'm sure Josh and I had different experiences with our pitch process. With Grounded, it was actually before we started before we were acquired by Microsoft, and it was something that we've been wanting to do at the studio for a while, which is make a survival game. And that was something that I believe that we already had buy-in from the studio, that like survival was a thing that we should be doing. A lot of people at the studio were very excited about exploring that space. So that was a little bit easier of a hurdle to cross with upper management at the studio for Fergus and the rest of the upper management to give us the go-ahead to start working on a survival game. The world idea with Grounded is definitely unusual for us. And that was something that once we started putting together kind of the material and pitch deck for Grounded, or what it was in the very early days, I think immediately a lot of us saw that so many people were very, very, very excited about this idea. The art team was, just kind of expressing like how much they really wanted to work on something like this, because it's so different from what else we worked on in the past with our previous games were Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. So we were just really excited to kind of do something completely different. And the excitement level pushed it kind of forward on our side. And once we got acquired, we had a little, I wouldn't even say it's a pitch thing. It was just kind of informative to the Xbox team. We're just like, hey, we talked with Matt Booty and his team. We're like, hey, this is what we're doing. And they're like, cool, keep doing it. So that was pretty much, the relationship, and they were very, very supportive of the idea, and they just wanted to see it grow and where we could take it.
Yeah, I would say that it wasn't quite the same on my end. Like Adam said, he had a core of people that were already focused on making a survival game, and then the world development kind of came a little later. But I think there was more widespread buy-in. When I had an idea for a game like Pentiment. Well, I mean, you can go way back in time, but like this specific type of game maybe started a little after the end of Deadfire, where I first started thinking about it. And then around the time Microsoft acquired us, I thought this type of game would be very, very well suited for Game Pass. Just because it's very niche, it's very unusual, and it's the sort of thing where, like you said, like, here's a movie from the early 80s that like, Paul Schrader made cat people, and it's crazy. You never knew it existed, but now it's here. And if you want to check it out, check it out. And so that sort of mentality is kind of what I went into it with. And I always knew it was going to be a very small team. And I kind of just bullied my boss into it. I said, Fergus, I want to take this opportunity right when we're acquired to do this project. It's really going to be unusual. It's going to be a very small team. And I want you to just have faith that I'm going to make something that people are going to enjoy, and we're not going to break the bank on it. I'm going to keep the scope very focused. And so he said, okay. And then I started working with Hannah Kennedy, who's our art director. She's amazing. And she came up with a fantastic art style. And then we grew the team to about like 5 people. And the nice thing about the process really is that, Xbox was aware that the project existed in a very vague sense, but we didn't show anything to them until about after our vertical slice, by which point, the verbal pitch, which is this is like Night in the Woods plus Name of the Rose, which a lot of people go like, come on, man. Like, I don't know what that is. But when we showed it and then described it, so we showed the game and then we described what it was a much easier sell. So once we showed what we were actually making and then talked about it, Xbox was very enthusiastic because we had already executed on the core idea. It wasn't this sort of vague concept. And they were very supportive. So we've had sort of check-in meetings since then, but at every stage they've been very supportive of it, specifically because it is very niche and unusual, and it has high appeal to a very enthusiastic audience. So the process is quite different from the old publisher model, but so far it's been different in a positive way.
Yeah, I think this is one of the questions I've definitely had about. Well, I've always been curious about, and I've debated this with, people like Patrick and other peers, and I've talked to developer friends, but like, it's always been hard to figure out long-term what the impact of a thing like Game Pass would be on what it makes possible. Because on the one hand, I would love to buy into sort of the utopian outcome, which is that it lowers the stakes for people making the decision to give a game a shot, right? It moves it from the $20 or $40 or $60 or $80 decision and turns it into a, hey, I have the subscription, I'll check this thing out, it seems neat. And so on the one hand, I like to think that it would lower the barrier to entry for stuff like that, and make it easier for like interesting passion projects to find their audience and make it easier for those projects to be greenlit. The other hand, video games are such a time intensive thing. There is no equivalent to the Netflix analogy breaks down real fast with video games, because Netflix, if I go on a binge or something, I watch 2 or 3 entire TV series in the course of a weekend where I make a lot of poor decisions. But can't really do that with Game Pass, because any of these games you're talking about a significantly higher commitment. It's the attention economy, I guess, that we're all in. And I'm curious, like, if you're sort of like maybe both your experiences working on games like this, but also as you project forward, like, what is your feeling about, does both working under Xbox and the existence of this model make it an easier sell for slightly off the wall or screwball pitches, or do you think the same forces that have governed how these things go over for years are they still basically in place, just kind of wearing different clothes? Is it just a different context, but it's kind of the same issues you'd be up against 10, 15 years ago?
I think there are different issues. I mean, like, I'm very skeptical anytime someone proposes like any sort of new distribution technology or any new model of anything. I'm just skeptical because I'm a system designer at heart, and I know there are always trade-offs to everything. Every every sort of scenario you set up, every sort of mechanism you set up for how to make games, how to distribute games, how to advertise games, there's always going to be trade-offs. So I think that it's a reframing of things that we already deal with. Like, you'll see people complain about Steam, which is obviously very different, but it's digital distribution with an ever-growing library. Not just an ever-growing library, but an accelerating library. Like, the number of new games that come out on Steam every year grows and grows. On the one hand, that's fantastic because so many people are able to make and distribute their games, and it's easier than ever for an audience to get them if they know they exist. So there's but that's the trade-off, is there are so many games. How do you get that attention? And from my perspective, working as part of an Xbox studio and Xbox having Game Pass, for me, it's easy to sort of pitch something specifically for that platform, but it is a curated platform, and there are trade-offs that come with that. And that is both, like you said, in some ways that's good because it pressures people to check things out while they're there and they value that they have access to it. But it is curated, which is the opposite problem, where there's only so many titles and you can only look at so much, and only so much can be on there at once. So, ultimately I am very glad for Game Pass because it does afford opportunities like this. But I think it's totally reasonable to look at it and say, yeah, there's a trade-off here for both developers and potentially for the people using it.
Yeah, and I think for me, I don't approach it any differently as a developer and a creator. I'm grateful that there's so many people on Game Pass and that will try out the game because the barrier of entry is so low. And to me as a creator, that's amazing. More people enjoying my game, that makes me happy. But as an approach to development, or how I think about what I'm doing or the titles that I would pitch in the future, I don't think that really changes the equation for me. I think I'll approach it fairly similar to how we did things even 10 years ago.
And I'm sorry, I was just going to add to that and say that while I agree with Adam, I can say for my own sake, I never would have proposed making Pentiment without Game Pass. I literally just wouldn't have done it. I just don't think it would have been possible.
Because you think it would have been shot down, or because you knew you'd be sending people off onto suicide?
Yeah,
mission?
yeah. I mean, it's the old mentality of publishers and developers is generally focused on larger teams, larger investment for a higher ROI, and that's not really the point in this environment. That's not why things exist in this ecosystem. So it would be at a company of over 200 people saying, hey, can I take a dozen people? I've been at the company, I'm the studio design director, I've been here for over 15 years. let me take some of our most experienced developers and work on this thing. Low investment, potentially low, in a traditional model. I just don't think I would have even bothered, because no one's going to pick that up. Even if my boss were supportive of it, it would have been so incredibly difficult to get a publisher to pick it up. And that's why this specific environment is the only way in which I really conceive of it being viable. So
I'm curious, just from the standpoint of, I don't know, I've always imagined launching a game is just terrifying. To be frank, I just imagine it as just being scary. I get anxious when I hit publish on a trashy little blog article that I've written in 20 minutes. Oh no, how's this going to play? And I still have that moment of what if I just really botch this? What if this goes up and it's man, you asshole, what were you thinking? And with games, I mean, it's not just the pressure's higher, the amount of investment, both time is higher. And I'm curious whether does the model shift that at all for you, where it's when I was becoming aware of the industry, I guess, in the 2000s and following it a little more closely, everything was about amount of space dedicated at major retailers, right? It was about, what the NPD reports were bringing in. So what was the trajectory of these things? So much hinged on initial launch, initial sales, initial orders, etc. And I'm curious, does this model you're in right now, as being part of Xbox and sort of being backstopped by Game Pass, does it lower the pressure? Does it take some of the fear out of like your experience of your roles, your jobs, or again, does it just shift?
Maybe a little bit. I think it does relieve a little bit of the pressure. We used game preview and early access for Grounded, so I think that also alleviated some of the pressure to get it right the first time. I think that's a huge win for developers, being able to iterate and kind of look at how people are playing your game and being able to adjust and iterate over the design ideas multiple times throughout the year instead of just like once every 4 years. I think that, is super powerful. And Game Pass did allow us to, because we had early success, because we had so many players on Game Pass, it allowed us to kind of take that time to really develop those features and work with our community with Grounded. And I do think it alleviates, even just the platform itself does kind of alleviate some of that pressure. But whenever you launch anything, as you just said, Rob, like it is a scary feeling. It is terrifying whenever you launch something because you have no idea. And I think it's always going to be like that.
And I think for me, simply existing under the ownership, like so Adam and I worked on Pillars of Eternity and Deadfire together, and making Pillars itself as a crowdfunded game was in itself sort of an act of desperation that worked out, and then it sold well and it reviewed well, and we were so relieved because it helped keep the company alive. Deadfire came out, and to be frank, like it reviewed well and it did not sell well initially. In the long term it did, but that was devastating. I mean, it was devastating personally because I want people to play the game. But also we know that like our companies, we need to make payroll, and like it's expensive, and that's a rough thing to go through. And, being part of, cause I've worked as part of an independent developer and part of under Black Isle Studios at Interplay, and now Obsidian under Microsoft. And it's that anxiety, the sort of existential anxiety, does tend to kind of go away. Also, the greater focus on releasing on a platform where, and I'm not saying it's not relevant because it is relevant, but the purchases are not like the thing that you're micro focusing on. For my own sake, making a game that's so different like this, I've completely shifted my thinking for this title versus other ones because it is so unusual. It is so niche. And so my thinking for this title specifically is it's for a small audience that is into the idea of the game. And as long as that audience is into it, even if it's fairly small, it's probably fine. And I am, especially on Game Pass, where I know like people they might download it and they might start playing it for 5 minutes and be like, there's a lot of reading and Latin and I do not like this. And they're going to like stop playing it. That's okay. They didn't buy the game. Like they don't like it, and oh well. But that's a very different prospect than asking people to spend $20, $30, $40, $50 on something and then getting furious and disappointed because some part of it is not what they wanted. So I will say, there's always the desire for validation among the audience that you want. We're trying to communicate, right? Like we're trying to share experiences, and you want somebody to come to it and be like, you fucking did it. Like you did it. And that's for me always going to be the underlying anxiety to make sure that I communicated what I wanted to communicate. But all the sort of other stuff that is more existential and more financial and that stuff is much lower within the environment of being part of Xbox and being focused on Game Pass.
I wonder from the standpoint of, a thing that obviously it's been a issue for a number of years, something that gets discussed now increasingly, is just about like working conditions in the industry. And I do know that, I look at a lot of stories about like exploitative working environments, like crunch culture, etc. It happened in a ton of places, and the context was different in a lot of cases. But I do know there were also a lot of places you could point to where, in some ways, it was, driven by sort of the publishing culture of the time. It was like this idea of we have to hit hard ship deadlines. If we do not make those, the world is going to end. And so you're just going to have to throw your body on this problem and handle it. And I am curious, when you become a part of an organization like Microsoft, like Xbox, and sort of live under this broader umbrella, does that solve any issues? Does it take some pressure off there, or is it fundamentally a thing that has to be dealt with on the level of like studio by studio? Does that have to be like an individual culture thing rather than just the context of the environment you're developing in?
I think everything comes from the top down. I mean, ultimately, crunch as an issue is something that starts at the top and works down. So if it can be a problem at the publisher level, it can also be a problem at the studio level. It can also be a problem at the project level. But they're usually because of incompatibilities of planning and scheduling. But it can be a problem at any of those levels and work its way on down. And it becomes increasingly difficult for people below to push back against that and make it and fix the issue. We're all working in an industry where deadlines are extremely important, and we're constantly, and especially now with all these games coming out, oh my God, like 20 years ago when you looked at a release schedule around the holidays, okay, like some games are coming out and some are really high profile, and that's always going to be a thing. Recently, looking at release schedules, it's a minefield, and there's like all this crazy analysis because there are so many games coming out. So there's always going to be interest and pressure related to releases, and you're always going to be in conflict with other projects at your studio, other projects across the studios that are sort of like part of your family, and then you're always watching out for releasing relative to other big titles, whether they're competitors or not. I mean, Pentiment is launching near Pokemon and God of War, and those are huge titles. They're not competitors to Pentiment, but they occupy such a mental space in the environment of people talking about games that you can't ignore that. So I think crunch is always going to come down to a problem with planning and scheduling, and I don't think that there's a magic bullet. It takes a concerted effort by the publishers and the studio leadership and the team leadership to push back against that and try to find a reasonable way through. Sometimes that means pushing things out. Sometimes that means staffing up. Sometimes that means cutting content and features. But ultimately, it does have to become a mentality of let me be real. You're always going to work a little harder toward the end of the game. Like, everyone's going to push, and you're probably not going to work perfect 48-hour weeks, and you will try as much as you can, but you're almost never going to avoid that. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. We have to do our best to resist that, but we also have to be very, very sensitive to the fact that when you work people over a certain amount of time for a certain duration, they do worse. They are less efficient. They get less done. They make more errors. The quality of their work goes down, and it is ultimately bad for everyone to engage in that. And it's destroying the greatest asset that you have, which is the labor that makes the games. Without them, nothing exists. So it really takes a concerted effort and respect from everyone at the top working down to make sure that doesn't happen, or to minimize it as much as you possibly can. And I feel, at least for my part, Adam can speak obviously to his experiences on Grounded. On Pentiment, when we asked for more time, we got more time. We explained, this is going to be tight, or this is not going to happen, and that was respected and listened to. And our team, there were a couple of 50-hour weeks in there, especially toward the end, but it was not the sort of death marches that we've had in the past, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, likewise. To echo Josh's statement, I feel that because we're now in the Xbox family, a lot of the pressure of hitting that milestone to get paid is gone in our new world, and I think that just alleviates so much of the team's pressure to hit those deadlines. Just because, like, before we would have to pushed extremely hard to hit those milestones just so we could get paid. And now we don't have that deadline to get paid. And so I think that alone helps tremendously. But I feel also in the Xbox family, they give us the flexibility and the time that we need to make the best games that we can with our teams. So I think that's also been a huge win for Obsidian and the developers at the studio. But I would say, like, I think Obsidian is probably, I've been at Obsidian my entire career. So I started as an intern. I've worked on almost all of our titles in some capacity. And I'd say that's one thing that we're always, as a studio and as our teams, we try our best to never have any sort of crunch culture at the studio. I think that's something that we've always been strongly against. Whenever we kind of see that happening, or even get a whiff of it, we try to do our best to figure out what's actually going wrong and trying to resolve that. And sometimes you can't because it's not out of our hands, but now it's we have a lot more room now with Xbox.
I think one other thing I'm curious about, just from, I think the other angle I think a lot about is, for a long time there's emphasis on crunch, but also there's been increasingly high profile stories of, it turns out like, hey, the studio put out great games, or it seemed like an awesome place, but it turns out like there was something rotten at the core, right? I think about like Mike Morhaime sort of tweeting as stories came out about Blizzard, feeling like I think he said something to the fact that I feel like my life's work is kind of being undone in some ways by what's coming out of this. And I'm curious, like, that seems like a harder in some ways, like, thing to self-police or self-correct for, right? Because it's like crunch culture, you can sort of say it's like, there's not necessarily a bad guy in there, right? You can say it's bad management. You can say it's like the system, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a bad actor in the room. And it seems like one of the things that has been sort of a recurring story, I would say, in like the last cycle of like stories about, bad culture and development, is that there are people who are just like in mid-level or senior level, that like there's not checks on them, that there's not a culture of being able to like confide in people about what's going on or how they're being managed. And I'm curious, like, how do you correct for that? How do you create a space where it's, not just like physically safe to work, but like emotionally safe?
I think it's difficult. I think it's actually a lot more difficult now that so much of our communication is virtual. A lot of communication that people have is invisible, which is not good on many levels. It's actually kind of makes it difficult to collaborate, but also it means that, and we saw this even before we started working remotely, where, people would get into arguments and have ongoing problems virtually, not in a physical space, and people were completely unaware of it. So I think there is at a fundamental level, there's the communication issue. But then I think, it gets to the point of, if people don't feel like they're going to actually be listened to and that nothing is actually going to be done, then it discourages everyone from doing anything, basically. So I don't know, much like with crunch culture, where it must become a mentality that everyone embodies and says, hey, everyone, we're not doing this. This is not how we run things. People have to have faith that there is accountability for bad actions and bad actors, and there are consequences for those things, and that when people raise concerns, they are not dismissed or minimized or siloed into nothingness. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of attention from a lot of different people. I think when those things get siloed and hushed up and swept under the rug, it can lead to these situations where, and you can always, we can't know what's in any individual's mind, whether were they really aware, or were they not aware, or were they turning a blind eye, or did they not really want to believe what was going on? And we can't know that. But I think that it's important for us to recognize that we all need to be part of the solution that involves not allowing that to happen, making sure that people are listened to and that there are actual consequences for these things. A very common mentality that I've seen very often is, especially when it's someone in a very senior position, is that the person is simply too valuable. No, they're not. I've never met a single person, no matter how talented they are in the entire industry, no matter what discipline they work in, that is so talented that they can get away with being abusive. I would rather not work with that person ever again than allow that to happen. And I know that that's a mentality, and it's very difficult to overcome because there is still such a sort of like worshipful attitude towards, like the big figures in the industry. But and that makes people hesitant to bring things up, hesitant to actually do things substantively about the problem. It's not worth it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely think genius is rare, but also it's a huge world with billions of people in it, and there's actually a lot of geniuses out there who can do special things, and I do think a lot of times that excuse is being used as a cover, right? Where it's like, yes, it would be challenging to replace this puzzle piece in the organization. I don't want to do it because this person, things fit well around them, and it's easier not to have to worry about it. So I'm going to say they're indispensable, and like they're not, but they're the hammer to your nail.
Yeah.
So, I'm always bad at this. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to discuss. I want to talk about Pentiment more specifically when we come back right after the break. And we're back. So, Josh, in some ways, as we were talking about that, I sort of realized we had a sort of natural segue to Pentiment, which I think, at least in its opening acts, is in some ways a workplace drama, among other things. But yeah, so for people, I think we talked a lot about this on this podcast when this was first revealed, because I lost my mind over the early trailers. This is completely up my alley, but why don't you explain to the people what Pentiment is, what Pentiment looks like, and why you did this?
Sure. Pentiment is a narrative adventure game set in 16th century Bavaria, which is part of the Holy Roman Empire. And it looks like a combination of late medieval illuminated manuscripts and early modern woodcuts from the early age of print. And it is focused very much on storytelling and the relationships that your character, Andreas Mahler, who is an artist, has with people in the abbey where he works and with the people in the community where he lives, the secular community where he lives. And it takes place over 25 years. So you can see all of the ramifications of the choices you make throughout the course of the story, and you can see how the different people in the community live and die and change over time.
Yeah, and I was so I've been playing it a bit, and it is very, very cool. It's a charming goddamn game.
Thank you.
I was playing it all last night with the dog curled up to me. She did not like some of the audio work where there's some very realistic sounding dogs barking in the distance.
Oh no.
There's birds, and so the dog, after some fruitless searches around the room to figure out where the hell all those noises were coming from, eventually settled down. But yeah, it's one of the things that really sort of struck me about it is that, gosh, what's the way to put this? I think there is a tendency for so many things set in this era to turn into the Python-esque Holy Grail parody of the Middle Ages, to play it all for laughs, to play up the superstition, to sort of present the world as, self-parodying in some ways. And I think one of the lines you seem to be walking, and it seems like a very challenging line to walk, is the game is bringing across that in some ways this is a very alien world. to us. Very different rhythms, very different structures, just a very different understanding of the universe in this period, but also very relatable that people are still people. And like, while the context is different, these are still reasonable people with like vices and virtues and selfishness and hopes and dreams that we would recognize. They're just shaped by their time and circumstances. And I'm curious how you negotiated that, because it seems like it'd be so easy to lapse into stereotype, especially because a lot of audiences will kind of want the stereotype, right? Because this is how they think about the past.
Yeah. I think it's because I think that people in the past are basically just like us. I mean, I don't really think there's anything intellectually or physiologically different other than, sort of generational changes in diet and things like that. But they're not extra dumb or extra weird or extra superstitious. They're just people. And it was important to me to walk that line, that specific line. I'm actually glad you said that, because yesterday I did an interview alongside one of our consultants who is my advisor in college at Kern. And what he said he was hoping that people took away was specifically that this is a very different world, but also these people are pretty much just like us. So yeah, I think it's important that you treat characters in this setting as, again, having... I'm
sorry, what was your professor's name?
Edmund Kern.
Okay. Not from Lawrence University in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Wait, I'm sorry. We were both taught by him.
What?
That's amazing.
Yeah, dude. He was on my thesis committee when I did. Sorry, you were Laurentian?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Appleton, Wisconsin, Lawrence University.
Yes.
Holy shit! What class?
98.
Okay, yeah. I came in 2002.
Okay, did you know Winston Black by any chance?
I did not.
Okay, well, he was also a Laurentian, and he's also
dude. I was wondering why this was fucking me up, because I was like, dude, this is just like shit Professor Kern would talk about, and I was like, man, this game's really like nailing it, because this is like how I. Oh my god, I'm losing my mind. Okay, so I'm probably not a reliable narrator, because it turns out that your lens is being informed by the same guy where I'm like, wow, Josh has really got this figured out. Professor Kern would approve.
Yep. So yeah, I don't know what else to say, except that, I thought it was important that these people, clearly are shaped by their environment and the time that they live in. But that they are their own people, and they can't be reduced to simple tropes where all religious people behave in a certain way, and all peasantry behaves in a certain way, and all craftspeople behave in a certain way. They are varied. That's why the cast is so large, is to show that variety and nuance in individual people over time. I want people to see the, like when we show time passing, we use a wheel that shows the divine office. It's the canonical hours, because the timekeeping device, other than the sun in the sky, are the bells at the abbey, and they play diegetically in the environment. That's because the people are using the church and their hours to guide their own lives. Their world is shaped by that and that understanding. And so we do really want to communicate the material reality and the physical reality of how people live in this time, while also saying, yes, they're just people. They're just humans like us. And some of them are really awful and some of them are really fantastic people, and some of them are funny and some are dumb. And that's just like us.
Yeah, I was thinking last night about, because I was thinking about, like, as I was playing, I was thinking a couple things that Professor Curran actually did that stuck with me. One was that, like, this stuff was real to these people. Like, these concepts of, like, salvation and damnation and, like, these doctrinal things, these mattered a great deal to these people. And, like, we approach these things, I think, from obviously a much more secular age, and it's very easy to be cynical about, like, well, you can see that there were also pragmatic political forces that would drive the world. Like, I mean, that's the history of the 30 Years' War, right? It's like, there's a lot of people who are doing it purely from religious conviction. There's some people who are opportunistic, but the thing that's really hard to parse is it's actually a lot of people who are both. It turns out that their conscience also leads them to a place that politically they see like this is the moment to make a change, that these changes have to be made. And I think that is a thing you really have to mentally travel to from the more secular perspective to really fully get it, because otherwise it does look irrational. It does look like, why would you care this much? Who would fight and die for the concept of their soul being at stake over a doctrinal point? And it's like, but for a lot of people, those were the stakes. Yes. And the other thing that sort of, and I love this in the, I love everything about the presentation in this game. I think the art it's incredible. It's one of those beautiful games I've played in ages. And I love that in the journal where you've got the, cast of characters and such. I mean, one of the things that comes through there a lot is like death is never present. Feature of life here, that people will get married multiple times. People will bury children in this world. And this is the other thing sort of that Kern said ages ago was he was like, a lot of people in this period, the concept of you lived in the vale of tears, that like all of this was like on your best day, there's still going to be the grief of mortality that is waiting for you. And that ultimately like life is so hard and life is so frequently sad in this period that just mentally it was easier to understand of your place in the universe as this is a temporary transit between the restoration of your mortal soul and however that's going to be judged. And what's funny is as I play this game, even though I don't think I don't feel like you're making that, you're hammering that point home, I'm struck by how consistently there is that awareness of and pointing out the way that in some like characters sort of have two things in view, right? It is the mortal and material present and the immortal and spiritual, beyond. Yeah. And those things live side by side in this game in a way I find really compelling.
Thank you. One thing that I think people don't appreciate, because it is kind of hard to wrap your head around, honestly, are things like 30 to 50% infant mortality. That is almost unbearable to imagine. But that was a reality of life prior to the 19th century. And, in some places it was maybe more like 20%, but 20%, I mean, like 1 out of every 5 infants dying before they're 2 years old. Yeah. That is unbelievable. And even higher when you go to 12. If you made it to 12, you maybe have a pretty decent life, given that medicine is not super great at this time. But death is constantly there. I mean, like Piero Camporisi wrote Bread of Dreams, basically arguing that much of Europe was perpetually in a state of borderline starvation all the time. It's true. Like people, even if they weren't dying, they were suffering from malnutrition, starvation, ergotism from eating rotten rye baked into like just this incredible stuff that seems unfathomable to us. But to them, this is life, and it doesn't make them. It makes them sad. I mean, and it's funny because there are some theories like the medieval man doesn't give a shit about their, infants until they're, 13 years old or something. But it's like, no, like they do care for them, but they also, this is just what happened. It was really awful. But they still lived life and they still dreamed. And in the same way that, there is this sense of why is Christianity appealing to these people in a very sincere way, other than it being what culturally surrounds them all the time. And it's, there's a point in the book hunt, if you've gotten to the book hunt with Sister Illuminata, where she says, like, she repeats the line, like, there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female in Christ Jesus. Like, and, Andreas can kind of respond and say, like, well, yeah, maybe in the next life, but not here. And she's like, this isn't the world you should be worried about. She's like, the thing ahead is the thing that I care about. But she's a nun. She's a very devout nun. So, of course, that's her focus.
Well, and even there, I love the pace and rhythm of life at the monastery is that there's people who like well, time to go work at the Faith Factory, and they've clocked in, and they're going to clock in for the
Yep.
I think God, who's the two bickering
Brother Guy and
artists.
Brother Guy and Brother Attic. Yeah.
Yeah, an Attic basically is like, it's going to be a long 40 years, man. And it's like, yeah, that's like, for like, if you were someone who just sort of got sent off here, like this is your lot in life, and you weren't bought in, it's a really long, there's worse gigs. Yep. But it is a long haul gig.
Yep.
And then you have people who are genuinely like fully invested in what they're doing there. I thought the conversation with Illuminata during the book hunt, two things I loved about it is that, one is she's a very well-read woman and has really thought about the texts that she's chatting with you about. But also just the presentation of stuff like this, where they project themselves into the text. I thought was such a beautiful touch.
Thank you.
And this is one of the funny things. I look at this game and I'm like, this seems like a really expensive project to greenlight in some ways, because it's all art. It's all like there's so much art in this game.
There is so much art.
And I don't understand how, especially with a small team, I don't understand how you're not still in there, like drawing little expressions on these characters. I guess, it is a limited set. It's a limited cast, but it is, to me, it's like, it looks so resource intensive of a particular set of resources.
It's funny you should say adding expressions, because we are still adding expressions for some characters, because that was like sort of the most highest volume thing. But I like to believe that making games for 20 years has made me fairly scope conscious and pretty smart about how to do things and how not to do things. And we have well over 150 unique characters. If you include all their age variations, I think it goes over 200. So there's a huge cast. And by the way, we've, with the exception of one contractor, we basically had two artists for the entire project. And much of how we accomplished this was just through planning. It was through discussion and planning and scope. And also, one nice thing about making a 2D game like this is that we don't really have the stages of concept that then goes to 3D. The concept is the art for the most part. Like, we make the concept and then animation breaks it up and then they animate it. But for example, many of the characters share rigs and skeletons. And they might even share body parts. And we planned all that out for maximum efficiency, because if we didn't, you're right. Like, if we tried to make everyone unique, like truly unique, completely unique, we'd still be working on the first third of the characters. It's just not realistic. So we're very production oriented. I think everyone is Hannah Kennedy also is very good about throwing up a red flag and saying, like, we're not going to get this done, or like, we have to rescope this, or for example, we have some really art intensive documents in the game. And then we also have a number of text intensive documents in the game. And toward the end of development, when I was like, oh man, you know what? We never really have a view of the Golden Legend, which is a big book about saints that Jakob de Veragene wrote. And I was like, well, we should. I was like, how about this? It's the text for the entry on St. George, but the art is just the illuminated capital, which is just St. George and the Dragon. You don't have to do a huge illustration of a saint. So it's mostly text. It's mostly reusing a lot of the parchment and fonts and things that we've used before in a smart way we don't want to make every piece of art an illuminated manuscript that takes that long to make. So a lot of this was really about careful planning and scope management as we went.
Real quick, I'm just curious. Does it mean anything when text is being corrected when characters are talking? Is that meant to indicate like a stumble or somebody like hems and haws or something? I'm curious. Like, it's because I'm playing this game at a snail's pace, in part because I'm like, I just like watching the text appear. I love when
thank you. You're
the
one
part
person.
where you meet the printer and the handwritten script gets wiped away and replaced with badly set typeset print. Like, all these gags are great. And so I can't ever just like skip the text, because I'm like, I have to see if there's a funny little like goof with the writing.
Yeah. So the errors are not, like planned. Every character has Obviously, they have a font that they use, which is not unique, but semi-unique. And then they all have a different writing rate and error rate. So if a character like Guy and Attic, the two scribes, they have an extremely, extremely low error rate, and they write very quickly. So it's very rare that you see errors. A character like Brother Folkbert uses a peasant script, and he's kind of challenged in a lot of ways. And so he makes a lot of errors, and he doesn't write very quickly. So it is a reflection of kind of their education and their comfort level with writing. And it's also a reflection of how Andreas perceives that character. Because there are characters where you talk to, like the Baron, where early in a conversation, Andreas is like, wow, this guy is actually a lot more educated than I thought. And his cursive script is replaced by the same humanist script that Andreas uses. And that reflects Andreas's understanding of him as a very educated man. So yeah, all of these things are symbolic, although not necessarily to this very specific level that you might be thinking.
Yeah, that does remind me of another beautiful thing I got, because it reminded me of like, times are dynamic. It's very easy to think about like the Middle Ages as like, in some ways the pace of change was very slow. It was different than life right now. And I know we're running short on time. I apologize. But there's a bit where Piero looks at Andreas's masterwork that he's working on, and they have that exchange about the depiction of the peasants foraging in November. And Andreas has that line about, this is how we draw November. This is how you depict it. And Piero makes the point, but this is not how November is anymore. And like, you know, there the context is, it is now moving out of living memory that like peasants had right of the forest to do things like that. And it hasn't been for a long time. And the way sort of traditions hang on in vestigial depictions, but like they go away. They stop being part of your experience of life. And I don't know, I was thinking of like things like climate change, but also just broader changes that we're dealing with, about like, there have people throughout history, but like in this era as well, people deal with the sense of like their traditional ways of life and rhythms that are disrupted by outside forces. And it takes a long time to realize that they're gone.
Yeah.
But
yeah, thank you. I think you're right. Again, people tend to think of the Middle Ages as this huge stretch of time where things were kind of the same and no one knew anything and it sucked. And then like the Renaissance and like, now we're in the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Great. But no, like change is still happening. And, again, the state of peasantry, the status of serfdom in different places and times, if people are aware that the German Peasant War existed, they are probably not aware that there were many other peasant uprisings in the preceding century, not only in Germany, but also in France. There was the Jacquerie, which was incredibly bloody and brutal. And all of these things were because of rising pressures and changes. Things that had been handled a certain way stopped being allowed. People stopped being allowed to move to marry. The inheritance tax became overwhelmingly punitive. Someone would die and a huge amount of their estate would be taken away from the family by the state. Right to the woods, right to fishing in public streams. All of this stuff were things that had been held in common and then piece by piece went away. And, I will say that we're presenting Piero as, it's kind of like Cadfael, if you've ever read Cadfael.
Oh, Cadfael was awesome.
He is the most progressive Benedictine monk in the history of the Middle Ages. So in some ways, Piero is represented a far more modern view of art and the creation of art, because in reality, this is November, dude. I'm not paying you to like editorialize, just illustrate it the way that we illustrate it. And you see it repeated. This is how this is illustrated. This is how it was not a time for like Jackson Pollock would be decapitated. Like this, it's not happening. So like, but he is in some ways reflecting a much more modern sensibility about the artist being a person who is creating a fiction representing truth. And that is an important thing to Piero, even if at the time it's not important to Andreas. And so that's kind of part of Andreas starting to think about like, maybe I should be a little more introspective about this stuff.
Well, I can talk about this all day. I know we got to wrap it here, obviously. Real quick, by the way, what did you major in at
History?
Lawrence? History? Okay, I was a classics guy.
Nice. Yeah, I knew classics majors. Actually, I used one of my classic major friends from Lawrence, who now teaches at Boston Latin School, as a resource for translating some of our more complicated stuff. But yeah, I started as in the conservatory, and then I switched over to
you're Connie. Okay.
Yeah, I started as a vocal performance major, and then I switched over to history. So
yeah, because that's the other part, is like playing this game. I'm like, oh shit, should I bust out my translation stuff? Because like there's a lot of text where I'm like, I think I could read this. I think I could hack this.
There is nothing in the game that is bullshit translated. Yeah. Everything is either using a source text or we have translated it into the appropriate language. Now, it might not be medieval Latin, or it might not be early modern High German, but it is German, it is Latin, it's not lorem ipsum. So I actually encourage people when they see that stuff to look at it and try to translate it, because it is, we did actually write all this stuff out for scrutiny. So
absolutely. Well, it's a treat for a nerd like myself. Thank you both so much for the time, for talking me through all this. And you can play Pentiment. I think it's out this week.
It's out November 15th.
Yep. So I think day of, actually, that this is going out possibly.
Awesome.
It will be available for you to play, and I do highly recommend it. Josh, Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back, and now I'm here with Ren and Cado to talk in a little more detail about Pentiment. So we already covered what Pentiment is in the previous segment. I am curious, Ren, how are you getting on with it? How are you digging it?
I'm really loving it. So I've played through pretty much the entirety of the first chapter, and I really, really love the game so far. I think it is... Listen, everyone was getting on me for saying it was a banner year.
I was so mad about this. I was like, she's gonna boast about how she laid the heaven.
Boasting. I'm not boasting. I am defending myself against allegations, against accusations. I am like my good friend Andreas Mailer, and I am coming to my own defense on this, the Court of Podcasts. Thank you very much.
It is indeed a banner year for narrative games, and this is part of that. This is one of the things adorning that banner. So yeah, we both been playing a fair bit. I'm pretty deep into the game, and what I will say, we're gonna avoid spoilers here, because this game has some pretty major shifts that happen over the course of it, both tonal, but also like just one of the things that emerges is this is a game told over a like longer stretch of years than you might first guess at. So there's some major jumps that happen a bit later that kind of recontextualize what's happening in the game. But even in the opening like couple hours, I think you get a taste of what this is really about, which is, it is a small town murder mystery, and a very, very good one, in my view. The line this game walks is that I don't think it ever loses any of its like good sense of humor. It's sort of endearing portraits of the various characters who inhabit the town of Tossing, being little Andreas Mahler and wandering around and chatting people up, like that remains delightful. I think what kind of caught me by surprise, though, is that, hey, this is not like a cutesy comedy murder mystery.
No.
Like bad stuff is going down in this mystery, but also in this world. And so I think it's very easy to look at this game and fully expect this is going to be a cute, whimsical, historical comedy adventure. And it's fully just not that.
Yeah, I mean, like this game's tone is fascinating because you can press a button at virtually any point in time and look at the illuminations in this storybook framing device. And you can be like, oh, hey, look, there's a little rabbit guy. I love this little rabbit guy. He's a friend. He's a companion in my trying times. And at the same time, the game will be consistently confronting you, not only with like dark material, but like deeply engaging with the questions of its setting, and constantly pushing its characters into difficult positions and highlighting the ways in which they interact with institutions.
This is, I'm glad you brought up the setting in particular, because this is one of the things I really admire about this game is that it does not shrink away from the complexities of this era. Mm-hmm. And both from the standpoint of it doesn't condescend to the era. It doesn't be like, the medievals, they just loved bad hygiene and inquisitions. That's just that's just what they lived for. It totally, especially as the game goes on, it totally sees that this is a really dynamic period in history. There's a lot of new ideas and new things afoot in the world, even though there's also a lot of deeply rooted traditions, and it gets at both those things. But the thing it doesn't do is it does not just use history as like a cool themed backdrop for the game. Like I think the way you see Assassin's Creed increasingly handle it, which is that we are just like, we're going to make this conform pretty closely to modern sensibilities. This is just a history like theme park, but we're not going to be tied to any of the history in many like meaningful ways. Whereas this is deeply informed by the history, but also is consistently at pains to point out that there are going to be people at any point who are not in conformity with the dominant trends. There's always going to be subcultures and opposition that tends to get flattened out of the historical record.
Right. And I think that is like one of the real strengths of this game's understanding of its setting is that I think that plenty of other games and other, like, not even just games, plenty of pieces of media that engage with historical eras like this are really satisfied to either do, the Assassin's Creed route or completely restrict themselves to institutions as they are understood by the people who used to run them and who wrote those histories. And that virtually every primary character in this game has some compromised relationship to like extant social systems is really engaging. And like your ability to solve the first murder is dependent on your ability to navigate, not only like understand, but like navigate these social systems and play people off of each other in the correct way.
Well, this is one of the things about, revisionist history is one of the most abused terms there is, right? Because revisionist history is often used as a pejorative where it's like there was real history. And then a bunch of, woke feminists came along and did revisionist history. And that's obviously not what it is, right? Like revisionist history has always been later generations of historians going back and finding that there were things left out of the historical record or new understandings change our understanding of the historical record, meaning it needs to be amended. But also just increasingly trends in historiography itself that, have trended away from great man history and portraits of, the great and the good, and try to dig into more things like people who existed on the margins or common people throughout these eras. And I think this is one of the things that really is a strength of this game is that it draws from that tradition of examining what is happening in the world that doesn't get written down in the major church histories or the major like histories of royals of the time. And so you get this. Yeah.
Sorry, just what time period is it actually set in? Like, do they give it specific?
They do.
Year?
It's the day and date, but they give you but you're going to move through the years. But it starts, I think, in like 1518.
Okay, yeah.
something like that. But it is all 16th century Bavaria, the town of Tassing, and
Bavaria.
it has. Yeah, and so that makes it an interesting place too, where it's like proximate enough
Right.
to places like Italy and such that it is aware of sort of the forerunners of the Enlightenment that are happening there, the Renaissance that are happening there, but also just isolated enough where it is still like thoroughly medieval there as well. Like there's still a lot of like not just beyond just the feudalism. There's still almost like the waning eras of like church militant. The triumph of the Catholic Church as like the true like unifying institution of Europe. And so like, in fact, I even thought the game was going to be more heavy handed about this because like literally one of the first characters you meet is like, so Andres, what do you think of Martin Luther's thoughts? And you might think like, oh, it's gonna be one of those games, right? Where like everyone is just like, man, have you heard what Martin Luther's been saying? He has some really interesting ideas about the church in Europe. And that's not what it is. That's kind of a misdirect because all this history is going to be like sweeping through the background, but it's not what the game is about necessarily.
Right.
And I think the thing that's worth noting, though, is that the game is interested in the questions around it, even if it's not going to go to Andreas and be like, what do you think about Martin Luther, player character? It will put Andreas in situations where you have to stake a claim on your relationship to particular social systems.
So this is so the thing that happened in the interview that I've alluded to, because it was on my mind even before, like while I was playing this game, I kept returning to stuff I'd read in my own coursework around this period. And the thing that came out in my conversation with Josh is that it turns out he and I had the same professor. Like my old like history professor is a consultant on this game, which I did not know.
Oh my God.
And so like there was so much in this game where I was being reminded of stuff that I came across in a really terrific course called Violence in Medieval and Modern Europe, which is what it says on the tin, but it's also talking about like state sanctioned violence, the role of violence in communities of faith and stuff like that. And it was taught by Ed Kern, but like some of the really and he was a great professor. And one of the things that he did was we had that mix of, we read some of the major sources, obviously, but also part of what he was doing in that course was also giving you a taste of here's what here's what doing history would mean if this were your calling. And so we did like some primary source stuff. It was translated, obviously, so it's not like a true primary source. But one of the things that I kept thinking of as I was playing this was, and this stuck with me when I came across it in that course was, the Inquisition kept really meticulous records in places. There are inquisitions that occurred where you basically have tons of bureaucratic work product of the Inquisitors' investigations, discuss like what they were investigating, who they spoke with. And one of the things that really stuck with me, they're trying to root out heresy in, I want to say it was like southern Germany, maybe it was like southern France, but it wasn't like there were some of the big heresies around that era, but what they were really looking at were heretical, like peasant beliefs. And there's this one interrogation record that you find that I found that was it was a midwife who was explaining how she came to realize that there's no such thing as like a soul. That the people don't have souls that leave their body or whatever. And in this interview the Inquisitor had with her, the reason she'd come to this is because her whole life she'd been talking about, the breath of life and the soul departing. And so she's attending a sick child who unfortunately like died during the night, but she watches closely as the kid expired. And nothing happened. And she has this moment just sitting there in the sick house, and just has this moment of, it's all just matter. Yeah, it's just like there's no soul, nothing left. The child didn't change. The child's just dead. And so she's telling the Inquisitor, who you can see in the interview is trying to find a way out of it. The Inquisitor, between the lines, you can kind of see the Inquisitor has tried to lead her to, well, obviously we don't necessarily talk about the soul as like being an actual like material, like breath. It's more, and this one just dug in and it was like, no. That's not like, this is just not true. Like I can observe it. I checked multiple ways to see if anything came out of that kid or if anything was being released. There was nothing. And so you're all full of it, basically. And I don't know what happened to that person, but the thing that stuck with me, and Professor Kern sort of, made this point in that course was that, so yes, on the one hand, there's a lot of like really devout faith and belief that like can be strange to us now. But just as likely in some ways is the fact that you still have like really smart rationalism inclined people out there who are not, part of the learned set, but they are just going like they are not going to take for granted what is put before them. And they're going to interrogate these things. And in this era, those people are enormously in danger. Yeah. This is just a woman applying a bit of like scientific method to a question she has. And at the end of it, she realized she doesn't believe in the metaphysical reality the church is portraying, and that gets her in some real trouble. It puts her before the Inquisition. But the thing that did kind of linger with me is that, yeah, those people always existed too. It's not like the Enlightenment came along and everyone is like, hey, maybe we should investigate and reconsider these things. Those people existed, those suspicions existed. They just literally got quashed out, and you end up finding records of them in effectively like police records. Right.
I mean, this era is specifically it's very specifically categorized by like, all of the like science and rationalism that came out of the Renaissance being curtailed by the pressure of the church, which is how you end up getting to the Enlightenment. But like, Galileo is fucking killed during this time. Like, this is exactly when we're finding the edges of these new ideas that are coming through and being like, oh, but it's all like, none of this is heresy yet. Because this is we're just explaining how God's world works, but we're not fucking with anything that God said, It's just like, we're understanding God's beautiful creation more. And
Skip, I appreciate God's beautiful creation, but the orbit of the spheres.
And I feel like a lot of times, things set during or around this time tend to focus more on like, oh, look at all the creators that made amazing like jumps forward. And it's interesting to hear that this is focused more on like further down the ladder, like lay people and like the people that history often passes over when described in the like great man theory of history.
One thing I like about the story you tell, Rob, is the Inquisitor attempting to lead the interrogated woman away from trying to do everything in his power to be like, listen, I'm trying to give you an out here. And that like, this is particularly at the reaches of empire, right? At the edges of empire where it's like, oh, fuck me, I don't want to do this. This is just a paycheck. Like, I'm trying to give you an out. And that particular relationship to power, I think is really threaded throughout Pentiment in ways that I appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, there's, gosh, like, to that point, there's the type of people who fully believe this is how the world should be and kind of exalt in that power. Mm-hmm. And yes, then there's people who are like closer to the realities on the ground, who kind of are trying to find the compromises between here's how it's supposed to be and here's how it is. And like a lot of what we're going to have to do, a lot of what, the world kind of runs on these compromises, right? Mm-hmm. Where, we're just not going to dig this deeply into it. There's, a character you meet in the woods in this game sort of indicates to you that, hey, there might be something going on between one of the nuns and the monks, and they're both basically the cooks for the abbey. And they're like basically they're secretly partners, but the thing that you realize is that actually tons of people are on the secret, and everyone has just kind of agreed,
right,
as long as we don't acknowledge it, we don't have to deal with it. Nobody wants to hurt these people, so we're just going to like let it slide. And those sorts of compromises are everywhere. I think, Ren, you met so early in the game, you have a couple conversations with the nuns who work in the library, and like, God, I loved everything about this, because you have Zdena, who's like the flirtatious like novice nun who really wants to hook up with Andreas, but obviously, like, she's kind of pressed into this work. A lot of people are a lot of people who end up in monasteries and abbeys are kind of cast there for whatever reason. But when you meet Illuminata, what's interesting is there you have like one of the most learned characters in the game, and also one of the most devout, and they live side by side. She's sophisticated and well read, but also none of that has like altered her commitment to like church doctrine, which like unfolds, and I think a great conversation you have about the books she reads.
See, it's church doctrine, but not church politics and like social like stations and institutions. Like that is the other cool part of that conversation, is that like Illuminata, for example, is extremely well learned and fundamentally critical of women's role in society, and understands how that role is created like through legal processes. And has acknowledged that the position she holds and I think this is part of her faith, right, is that the position she holds at this monastery is what gives her a little bit of freedom to move, right? And I think that like she addresses that directly and is expressed through her character in ways that are like, again, I think this is an excellently written game.
That written, and also just like the way they play around with illustration and form. Like there's a bit where, as you're talking about books, the characters are projected into the pages of the books. And there's one thing, she's having you like get books that people checked off in the library and not given back. And one of them is the Aeneid. And she asks like, so what did you think of the Aeneid? And I think you can give a number of responses, but when the conversation turns back to her, they're both projected into the pages. And Andreas is projected into the page of Aeneas sailing away. And Illuminata is projected onto the page of like Dido weeping on the shore. And she just unfolds. She talks about like, it is a great work, but it's also a great work for men. And she gets into the notion of like how these old narratives define and then reproduce these definitions of like, where do men and women stand in relation to each other? And she does see how that relates to the lot of her and her sisters in their lives. She draws these connections, and it's all handled really, really well. I think it could have been a kind of annoying after school special moment of like, hey, we see that the Middle Ages were problematic. It never comes across that way in this game, though.
Never girl bossy. Like Illuminata never comes off as like girl boss energy. No,
and there are characters later you meet who have aspirations to like live independent lives as like tradespeople and such. But the thing that they're very clear about is that actually legally this is basically impossible for a woman. That you can, this is not a Disney movie where it's like, just, follow your dreams and girl boss your way into. Why didn't women in history just stand up and say, I think that's silly, and work whatever jobs they wanted and lead whatever lives they wanted? And here you sort of see time and again the sheer number of structural obstacles placed before women to have any sort of independence in this world. And it doesn't even like the society doesn't even need to be. And tossing fundamentally isn't like a society that like hates women, but all its structures are misogynist.
Right.
And like
Right.
the only women who have some, like some agency are those who somehow manage to inherit from husbands. But even there, that's a really contested thing that comes up where, there's a character who the argument is that women can't even inherit. And so the land she and her family have worked for generations is forfeit. And this emerges as a real bone of contention in the story. It's the other part of this, though, is it's not just a tour through history. It also is a pretty good whodunit, because there's a character you meet who is clearly marked for death. Let us say. So basically, in the early stages of the game, you meet this dude, Baron Lorenz, and everyone in town, for varying reasons, appears to have it in for him. Like, this is the most Murder, She Wrote thing of like shitheel walks to the town and everyone's like, I'm gonna get you. And lo and behold, the next day they done been got. And then the question is who did it? But so much of this ends up touching on the history of the town, the history of people here. And a really menacing thing in all this is it appears that a lot of this was being stirred up by someone who was leaving really unusually illustrated, like unusually scripted notes. Like Andreas, who knows from scripts, he knows this is an unusual hand. He can't figure out anyone in the Abbey who would be capable of doing it. And they're all notes of like two various people who have a reason to kill Lorenz. They're all notes being like, remember what he did. He's going to be here at this time. Do what needs to be done.
I wanted to be able to pull those out and look at the fucking handwriting so bad, because there's a lot of handwriting in this game, and I wanted to look at it so bad.
Yeah, it is. It's this wrinkle, because the way the game, for the most part, like Night of the Woods, you're going to be able to run around and talk to everybody at every sort of stage of the game. The game's divided up into portions of the day in the Book of Hours, and you can go and talk to everyone. But there are some conversations, some activities you will do that will consume the rest of like this chapter. And you can't do all of them. That's kind of the choice you have to make as you investigate is, what leads do you follow? Who do you end up spending? Like, for instance, every day you have to eat twice a day. Who do you eat those meals with? Those meals will have conversations associated with them that give you useful information. But there's like, probably 10 people you could go have lunch or dinner with, and you can only choose from 2 each day. So how are you going to allocate that time? That's probably the biggest constraint on this that keeps it from just being a pure like visual novel thing where you're running around. And I know visual novels use this mechanic too, but like it stops it from being a thing where you just go and talk to literally everybody and get all the narrative out. You are still up against the fact that you do not have enough time to do a comprehensive enough investigation. And sort of the inkling I started to get early in that case was, you've got a bunch of people who have reasons to kill the Baron, and none of them feel right.
No,
like you have so many people who are implicated, and none of them feel like the right person.
It's all completely off. Where it's just like, you have to make a decision at the end, and I made a decision at the end of that trial, and I know that there are other explanations for the person who I implicated, and I recognize that. Was that person a motherfucker? Yes, they were. They were a motherfucker.
Ren, I have typed in the chat, but I have not sent who you implicated, who I implicated.
Who you
I'm
implicated.
Curious. Please type back.
Do this
I'm just so curious.
Okay.
Yep. You got it?
3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that mother. It wasn't that motherfucker, but it was that motherfucker.
Well, so there's this great device this game has, which is, and this is when I knew I was lost to the game. It opens on a great credit sequence, great music and all, but it opens on Andreas dreams, and his dreams take him to Prester John's court, and so he goes to this like medieval idol where Prester John, like one of the like mythical kingdoms of Christianity, is holding court. Saint Grobian is there. Socrates is there, and they're all like, "Hey, what's up, Andreas? How's it going?"
God, I wish Diogenes was there. Oh, I wish Diogenes was there so bad.
It's so good as like he shoots the shit with like these figures. But yes, right before it's time to make a ruling about like who are you going to tell the investigators about, they all kind of give you the sign that like, listen, this is a capital crime. Like whoever they think did this is going to be put to death. So and Saint Grobian sort of puts in there. He's saying, he's like, what Prester John means is, don't tell them about anyone you don't mind. Tell them about people you don't mind seeing get executed.
Right.
And that was kind of the ruling of like, of the fingers I can point, I would feel the least bad about pointing it at this person.
Right.
And then I felt kind of bad when it all unfolded because like, dude didn't deserve what he got. Dude did not deserve that.
I'll be honest. That executioner, not great. I think he's kind of mid at his job at best.
Well, that's the thing. You got to imagine that shit happened all the time, right? You got like, it seems like a hard job, like sawing through someone's head in one stroke. So yeah, it's like, so that's the thing. This game gets gnarly. There's some stuff there where you're like, well, that was significantly worse than I hoped.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is also tying back to what I was talking about earlier with the Inquisitor who does not want to be doing this shit, is that like at certain points, your player character is that guy where it's like, I don't give me a reason not to implicate you in this crime. I am fucking begging you. I am coming to you hat in hands. Give me a reason not to implicate you here. And like some people do. And you're like, great, cool. This is completely improbable. Thank you for giving me something completely improbable, as opposed to others where it's just like, man, you didn't give me anything to work with.
Well, and that's the other thing is like Andreas as a character is kind of an interesting place because, you know, he's a educated man. He had university schooling, and now he is a journeyman artist. And so he's not nobility, but he's also so much more privileged and worldly than anyone in the town. And so he ends up being this guy who, like, you know, he's like the Venn diagram of this world. He's one of the rare people at the very center of it, where he can sort of move between the secular world and the cloistered world. He can speak with nobles as if they are equals. And so he's kind of a perfect foil for this first investigation.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that the Disco Elysium comparisons are going to really be going wild with this game. But I think that Andreas as a character is in a similar position to that character, in that, like, one, you build them as you go, right? Andreas is their background is built as you go throughout the game. Point one. The other thing is that, like, at least in my playthrough, Andreas at his best is just kind of a weird guy who listens to people. And that, like, that characterization is really engaging. And like the ways you can play Andreas are really engaging.
Yeah.
In a way that I appreciate a lot. Like, it does not feel like you are playing a player insert character. It feels like you are playing a guy with experiences and ways of approaching situations in a way that I really appreciate.
So did you build him as, because I just kind of leaned into the idea that he was an itinerant artist. I went with the Italy background for him, and I went with the, like, so what's his whole deal? Why hasn't he, like, started his life in a lot of ways? And I went with the Good Time Charlie background, where it's all like wine, women, and song. So my Andreas was kind of a insubstantial fuckboy type character.
Interesting. My Andreas is a dude who went to university, got big into books and is doing Illumination because he really loves literature and because he really loves narrative, but he studied a bunch of weird shit at college. He studied medicine and occult rituals.
Oh, so I went with law and nature.
Yeah, so I've got this dude who just studied medicine and occult rituals, and which puts him, his background as someone who loves books puts him closer to the nobility and to the folks working at the monastery, but his actual schooling puts him closer to the people working on the ground. He knows how to treat people who are wounded and also knows how to navigate local pagan traditions. And how to discuss those with people in ways that keep everyone safe. And that was one of my favorite things about my character and about the characterization is that a lot of the occult background is not as much about do you know what this is? Because there's a lot of time with a knowledge check. And those times are clear. The times that really get me are the times where it's do you know how to talk about this?
Yeah.
Do you know how to have a conversation about these pagan beliefs or however you want to frame them, where at the end of it, you don't get someone killed or you yourself do not get killed or implicated. Because that is a constant threat. Because again, like we've mentioned, this game takes place at the edge of empire and at the edge of in a deeply compromised place in every regard, right? And so it is both under much less and much higher scrutiny than anywhere else. It is the kind of place where no one is looking at it, but the second they do, it all falls apart. For every single person there, and trying to interact with it in such a way that you do not bring that hell down upon every single person there, or you limit who that hell is brought down upon is one of my favorite parts of the game.
Yeah, and I will say the later chapters is hell cannot be kept at bay right. for long. So as you go further into the game, some of the stakes you are trying to manage and massage in the first case, those are now just the table stakes for later sections. But yeah, I think so. We might end up doing a spoiler chat about this at some point if you end up sticking with it. I don't know, Cado, maybe we've sold you on the game or maybe not.
Absolutely.
But
I was excited for it before this, but this even, really pushes it much harder as well until I need to play this.
I'm thrilled. It seems to be getting rave reviews everywhere. This is one of the things I was a little bit concerned before this came out that it might be so niche in its appeal that it might not cross a ton of boundaries, but it seems like just about everybody is having similar reactions. And I think that just speaks to how well it is making this rapid fire historical deep dive make you feel almost it makes you feel like you're a native to this world rather than rather than going on a tour of it. So and I think that's a real achievement, because I think there's a version of this that is bent under the weight of exposition and context, and I'm consistently astonished by how lightly it wears all of that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the device that it uses really elegantly is the fact that not everyone knows everything, and that sometimes characters will tell you things, other times you tell characters things, and the placement in the world is really strong, and the ways in which people tell you about what they know. Not everyone knows everything, and you can build a okay picture of what is happening in the moment through those couple dozen conversations. And that picture looks very different depending on who you talk to and when.
All right, I think that will wrap it up for Pentiment for the moment. We're going to take a quick break, and then Patrick got finished with his other stuff sooner than I thought, so I think we might just roll right into mailbag, all four of us. So let's hang loose for a moment, and we'll be back after this. And we're back for a quick dip into the mailbag. But first, Patrick, I have just one question for you. Are you back from the bear game?
It was a new game, Rob. And I actually had remarked to buddy I was with at the game, it was the fourth quarter and it was only 2:00 in the afternoon. I was like, buddy, we might make it back in time for the 4:00 games. But then that last quarter was very slow, and one look at the cabs to get back home, they were $220. So we did not do that. We got a beer and waited for the surge price. Well, that's what happens. It's like, everyone's trying to leave, get out of the city. Like the vast majority of the people going to stadium games in the city of Chicago they don't live in the city. So it's just like it is a literal surge to get back to the suburbs at the end of it. So we went and got a couple beers and waited till it was $60.
Yeah, I was deeply envious. You saw a really good game.
Rob's seen one of the. We'll do this. I think we need to do a check-in after this little mailbag. I know this is turning into like a 4-part podcast, but between talking about a game, cutting to an interview, cutting back to mailbag,
and then
cutting
finally,
back to sports.
Rob will head off into the Grey Havens.
Yes. This episode is the ending of Lord of the Rings, but yeah, I have some thoughts, Rob. So we'll save them till after the mailbag.
All right, sounds good. So our first question comes from Henry. Dear Waypointers, we love to talk about games that we love to remake or get a sequel, but what game would you erase? Maybe because you hated it, maybe because of its effects on game design, monetization, or society. Maybe you just found the discourse around it annoying. Maybe it just took too much of your time. Just for the hell of it, I'd erase Rogue so that maybe the genre could have a better name.
That's really good.
I think the implication that would have still happened without Rogue. Something else. What would it be? What else was like that? What else? What was the first roguelike after Rogue?
That's the problem. I think you just end up with a different, like, annoying blank like.
Right.
You know
I
what?
feel like we actually got lucky with Rogue. I feel like that's like it rolls off the tongue as opposed to like a 2-word title. Like Metroidvania, bad name. It's catchy, but it's like it's a bad name, and I don't want another one of those.
NetHack like.
See, awful.
This is I will spend more brain power thinking of one that means something to me, but I'm gonna do this for other people. I am going to save the world from Sonic the Hedgehog. Just gone. The Sonic cycle broken.
Jesus Christ.
Platformers were already established. There'd be another fast one. You gotta go fast. You will find it. Maybe Bubsy would have been it. But the Sonic franchise has hurt so many people for so long. And for what? Not worth it.
The first half of it was great. Their mistake was leaving 2D planes.
Patrick, I approached this question from a similar angle, as I want to save the people I love. And Cado, I'm sorry, but I am obliterating Dota 2 from the record. Absolutely,
you know what?
Absolutely ethered for that.
Guess what I was gonna pick.
Wait, so specifically Dota 2 or the mod?
No, Dota 2. It has to be Dota 2. The mod could have existed. Maybe it became something else. Maybe Heroes of Newerth fucking blows up instead of Dota 2 coming through.
Heroes of the Storm could have had a second chance. I would give Heroes of the Storm a second chance.
If we still get to Pokemon Unite, I'm fine.
And you would, because League would still be popular.
Exactly.
League would still be popular. But this is my choice for other people. I like Patrick. I'm trying to dwell on something that I would pick for me.
God, yeah. Please give me those hours back.
You do, Cado. You would have just found another way to waste them.
No, you're not wrong. That's the issue. Is it was free, and I could play it on my white MacBook Pro that I had, my first laptop computer. That's why I played so much Dota 2. And all those hours would have just ended up back in TF2 in Team Fortress 2.
I was gonna say
I spent more time over there.
God, I have a few options here, because one, I've been on record thinking that I've always argued that Rome Total War both turned the Total War franchise into like a mega blockbuster franchise, but also taught some dangerous lessons as far as it does not matter if the game works, because if the presentation is cool enough, people will forgive literally anything. And I think like Rome Total War comes out, and then you have just year after year of dodgy releases from Creative Assembly, because it's like everything's going into tech. And then does the strategy game hold up? And it doesn't really matter for a ton of people into playing those games. And I always sort of felt that was a really double-edged sword. But honestly, if we're talking about double-edged swords, here, like, I have two thoughts, and I'm kind of curious what you make of this. I am torn between whether I would guide my axe towards GTA 3 or Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3 is more targeted. Far Cry 3 is like, that is the one that
you don't break any design momentum by axing Far Cry 3. With GTA 3 you do. That's
the thing. So I do think Far Cry 3 I think it does alter trajectory for a lot of Ubisoft games around it. I think like it's easy to forget Assassin's Creed had like done some table setting, but I feel like Far Cry 3 has always sort of felt like at that point you had an Assassin's Creed model and then some jet fuel from Far Cry 3 of just like collectibles and crafting and all these little activity areas. And so in some ways I'm like, maybe if you kill it, you can alter that trajectory. But Patrick, you sort of put your finger on it. GTA 3, I think, is like ground zero for the entire open world, like game design movement.
Yeah, a game like that, something like that, like that was inevitable. It's where the technology was pushing, but you just splinter the arcs of design in so many different ways without that as the template that it's working off of. Not to mention that's responsible for the ascent of Rockstar as a studio, which is itself buoys lots of things that like Take-Two is a publisher, not really a publisher, absent GTA 3. Like that is what turns them into mega status. BioShock probably doesn't exist unless GTA 3 is like there's a lot of interesting repercussions that come directly out of GTA.
Oh, I don't want to kill BioShock. I don't want BioShock to get caught in the crossfire.
2K. Okay, I checked something.
Yeah.
I checked something, Rob.
Yeah.
You would, I think, if you axe GTA 3, you save the Far Cry series too.
Yes, because
like, because if GTA 3 does not exist, then but you still get Far Cry 2. That's the difficult question.
Yeah,
but that one's weird, isn't it?
It is weird, but it's also like Crytek made huge non-linear shooters, but they did not make open world shooters. Far Cry 2 is open world, and it's very weird. I think if you don't have GTA over there, I do think maybe Far Cry's trajectory is different. I also think, in some ways, what I'm also trying to get specifically is both I'm trying to intercept a bit of like open world design that I find kind of boring and uninspiring. But also specifically, if you can prevent Far Cry GTA 3, you can prevent GTA 4 from happening, which is a game I love, but also feels like the thing that was like, what if we just made big, epic movie pastiches? A central selling point for both for Rockstar, and then again, that becomes the hallmark of a lot of open world games. Of we are going to rip off movies and put their major scenes intercut with tons of pretty low stakes, meaningless, wanders across a big open world. So yeah, that's my those are my suggestions, and it does seem I think y'all persuaded me. I think GTA 3. I don't know what happens if you remove GTA 3 from the equation, but I do think it is a profoundly different world.
I agree.
And I would be interested in seeing that world. Any others that like Cado, did you have one you wanted to kill?
It was Dota 2. It was Dota 2.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he was just concurring.
Yeah, Ren just happened to pick the one.
Fair enough. Hi, Waypoint crew. lots of people have a comfort show, movie, or game, something you turn on after a long work week, snuggled on the couch in fuzzy socks. A piece of media that always brings a smile to your face and sets your soul at ease. For some, it's endless rewatches of 90s shows or Lord of the Rings or starting new towns in Animal Crossing. For me, the movie I curl up in a blanket to watch with ice cream is The Blair Witch Project. I love it.
Hell yeah.
Unapologetic.
Plot
Sometimes
twist.
you complain it's not a real horror and nothing happens. I'm enamored with the found footage and mockumentary genre of horror. I've heavily considered starting a YouTube channel just to make video essays on every bit of Blair Witch media. Emily, follow your bliss.
Please, I will be the first
this is
to
how Patrick
subscribe.
ends up writing,
you want to
writing an
talk
article
about this?
you.
Yeah, you want to talk about the sci-fi faux documentary they did as part of the PR campaign for the Blair Witch Project? I'm here for it. That was a great piece of media. Please analyze it for me. I'll watch it.
Emily would like to know your most unusual or eyebrow-raising comfort media. So I have a lot of comfort. Like, I am someone who draws a tremendous, like, one of the most soothing ways for me to like deal with just occasional, like, you know, when there's like a runaway bit of anxiety or something, or I'm just like worried about something and stewing over it. Like, there's a lot of things I pull from because it's one of the most like soothing things that I can do is like watch a thing I love. I will say this, probably over the years, the highest, the thing I've fallen back on the absolute most is probably the movie Sneakers. I find it impossible to not enjoy and just get good vibes from Sneakers. It's a, you know, awesome cast, great script, some great scenes. And I think this is the key. I'm not sure I fall in love with Sneakers nearly as much if Ben Kingsley does not have this unforgettable turn in, you know, at the end of the second act and the beginning of the third. If Ben Kingsley doesn't show up in that movie and lend it some real gravitas, I'm not sure I love it as much. I think it ends up more of a Ghostbusters type movie that I kind of grow out of. But because Ben Kingsley is there,
random shot at Ghostbusters.
No, I mean, I love Ghostbusters, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's a movie I loved as a kid. I don't think I'm ever going to love Ghostbusters that way again, whereas Sneakers I kind of do. But in keeping with that vibe, I think another weird like comfort thing, and this is maybe unsurprising now that I do a fucking podcast devoted to Tony Gilroy's Andor, but Michael Clayton has become a movie that I'm like constantly returning to, where I'm just like, you know, I'm in the mood to watch right now, Michael Clayton, and I will just end up putting that on, you know, because of the whole vibe, some of the issues it addresses. I think it is a movie kind of about feeling lost and overwhelmed in the world, but comes to some beautiful conclusions through that. So that's a movie I return to a ton for that reason.
These don't exist. Like they did when I was younger, but like so much of my life is just barely keeping up with the things that I want to watch that it's very rare to turn back. But the thing that is the closest equivalent is football, frankly. Like what I like about football is it actually breaks the cycle on the very thing I'm talking about here, in which I just like sitting around with friends and watching even just the worst possible game. And you can extrapolate this out to just sports more broadly, but of the people I talk to the most in my life, football is the one that everyone is the most knowledgeable and passionate about, and thus can spur the most amount of discussion. But in the same way that I like sitting around, like when I was younger, sat around with, you know, drinking beer, talking to people for hours. I don't do that anymore. But now the version of that is like sitting around while my kids are running around with other kids watching football. And when that goes away, like it bums me out, because I like that all day Sunday sitting around nursing some IPA and just like casually shooting the shit with like the people in my life. And when that goes away, it bums me out. So like that is frequently my comfort food and gets me out of the because of my life I need to do everything the most efficiently and always look forward. And like sports is what gets me to slow down a little bit.
I feel like I'm in a similar position as far as like I don't return to things very often. But if there's one thing I do ever rewatch, there's like a couple of movies. One of them is what was it, 2005, 2006 version of Pride and Prejudice, the Keira Knightley one.
Yeah,
and
can't believe we never did that.
There was so much to contrast with the Big Lebowski, which is a movie that the first time I watched did not find very funny.
Big same.
But has only gotten funnier every single time I watched it since then. I watch that at least once a year. That's like the one thing that there's an annual rewatch at some point.
I feel Lebowski is so memed on, and it is so oversold to people who see it the first time that like it's really hard to see what's actually there, because your first viewing experience is just like kind of almost like warped by
like
everything that surrounds the movie.
Half the time you're being shown it by somebody who's gonna quote like all of it alongside the movie.
Yeah.
Like you got a 50-50 shot at that basically.
Yeah.
And now I can quote most of that movie.
Well, and I was really unsold because I was seeing the people like who were not fully getting it, and like they sort of like the big applause lines for that, but like the thing that fully won me over, that I'm like, this is a stranger and more magical movie than like people even like really tell you, is the big Busby Berkeley dance number, the dream sequence, with the bowling alley themed dream sequence. And once that happened, I was just like, okay, this movie just like left this mortal plane and is now doing something completely different.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where I became an absolute fan.
It's one of the top Coen brothers, honestly. They make all their shit is so amazing, honestly, but it's definitely one of my favorites.
As we'll get
one
to
of the
on
ones
my Coen Brothers Keeper.
Yeah.
Which we're going to be piloting on the next episode of My Turn.
Yeah.
I think that for me, I don't really return to full pieces of media. I return to moments with consistency. So like if I'm having a really bad day, just like bad depression, I will rewatch the Insulindian Phasmid scene from Disco Elysium. Or I will like watch the first major duel in Mobile Suit Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Or there's dozens of scenes like this where it's like, okay, I don't really return to the whole piece of media, but I can return to the moment that makes it the thing for me, and remind myself that like things can make me feel that way. Alternatively, I do have a comfort genre, which is 3DS JRPGs from 3 years before whatever the current year is. And this is getting problematic as time marches onwards. Is like it's real hard to find a 3DS JRPG that came out 3 years ago when I'm having a severe depression, like week-long depression. So occasionally I do have to break my rule of it having come out 3 years ago, or it being relegated to the 3DS. The last one I did was, I believe it was Persona 5. No, the last one I did was Stranger of Sword City, which is a dungeon crawler. And the one before that was Persona 5 Royal.
All right, I think I've just got one last question for us today. It's been with all these segments, it's been a bit of a long show, and I think there might still be some sports talk happening in the margins. But I think Phil from DC deserves a response on this. What would your bird call sound like? Now I want you to think about this, but I actually know what mine sounds like. Like, cause I do, like, I know exactly like what noise I would make if I were a bird. And it's like, the sound that
You can't describe it. You have to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, obviously it's like,
Is that a bird?
Amazing. Beautiful.
Is that a bird? Are we sure that's a bird?
That sounded like a mechanical bull revving up.
Like a little more walrusy than.
Nope. It's so the thing is, like nesting, like I think boobies and albatrosses make sounds like this, but it's a sound you encounter a lot on like, for whatever reason, it's a sound I associate a lot with like not necessarily waterfowl, but like water adjacent birds who like make their nest there. But like that is like, that's me. When I hear that sort of like pleased, all is right with the world surveying of their little nest and all their little treasures, I'm like, that's me. That's the noise I would make.
I think y'all have heard mine.
Pardon?
I think y'all have heard mine. It's just whenever I hiccup real loud.
Yeah.
That's
fair.
it. Like that's the noise.
Damn,
bird
nailed it. That's the easy one. Yeah, that's true. I think I was closely associated myself with it wouldn't be like a bird noise. It's just a woodpecker.
Yep. I was especially like the hair. I totally think that would be.
Wow! I found the albatrosses.
I think I saw a thing where woodpeckers, like their tongue is so long it wraps their brain up in like padding so that they can do the woodpecker thing. Because otherwise they'd be inflicting like massive brain trauma on themselves.
Sorry. You're suggesting to me. You're coming to me on a Monday morning.
Oh God!
And you are saying to me that woodpeckers wrap their tongue. It is a Monday.
Oh no!
I just started my week.
This is not regrettable information. This is cool information. But it is information that I think you should be aware of.
I mean, look, I said I'm all about hyper efficiency.
Yeah.
I got spare space on my brain. Put it in.
Ren, you strike me as someone who's thought about who they'd be as a bird.
I mean, it's right in my name.
Yeah.
It is across every single one of my platforms. I went by the name Raven for many, many years for good reason. I love those fucking birds so much.
Tell me what sound a raven makes.
They're so smart. One, they yell a lot, but they're so fucking smart. Those birds are stupid smart. I don't care about the yell. The yell isn't it. It's not.
What's the yell? How do you do the yell? I don't.
Perfect.
Nice.
That nailed it.
It's not that. It's when ravens are talking to like other ravens and they're trying to keep it on the down low, they do like a little coo to each other where they're like just like tiny little bird noises to each other. And that's when they're like trying to have a fucking conversation. But my favorite fact about ravens is that when they find a dead raven, they will start like yelling like, hey, Eric's dead. And then all the other ravens come over and they determine if the area is still safe to be in based on what killed the raven. So if they can find like a particular, like they basically do murder investigations to be like,
incredible.
Do we have to go?
The Raven Safety Board convenes.
Right. They're like, we might have to fuck out of here. The other thing is that they can talk, which rules. And I do have a favorite video of a raven talking.
I just posted one of mine that I saw recently. Loki the Raven on TikTok. Going,
yeah. They'll chat with you. They're friends. If you teach them to tell you to shut up, they will when they get annoyed. They're incredibly, incredibly smart birds and have like a really, really wide vocal range.
I celebrate the entire Corbett family. Like honestly, just fantastic, fantastic birds. Good answer. Worthy bird. Worthy bird call. That will do it for today's Waypoint Radio. You can check out, we published on waypoint.vice.com. By the time you're listening to this, my review of Pentiment should be up. If you want more from Waypoint, you can follow us on Twitter at Waypoint, Facebook, and YouTube, Waypoint Vice. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Zachney. Patrick, where can people follow you?
Oh, I'm sorry. At Patrick Levick. I muted myself when I was calling.
Cado.
At _Cado_appears.
Ren.
You can find me on Twitter at Ren or Raven.
Thanks to Waypoint Plus, we've been able to have a bunch of fun streams lately. Cado and I are continuing our magical journey through Motorsports Monday. We're playing a bit more Motorsport Manager. We seem to have... people have theorized that there's a pattern where we're only capable of controlling one car like remotely competently, but that does appear to be true. and now the wheel has turned.
Santa had returned to the fold. It should be a happy day.
And yet we're moving on to our rich boy. He's going to lead us to victory. Patrick is, of course, also continuing to play Cyberpunk, and Natalie and I are continuing our playthrough of System Shock. For our Waypoint Plus listeners, we have, I think this week, we are going to be doing the Hail Caesar My Turn. Manhunting was postponed, so that's going to be next week where we're listening to Miami Vice, or we're talking about Miami Vice. But this week, it's going to be Hail Caesar, the Coen brothers comedy of 1950s Hollywood. If that sounds good, or you just want more Waypoint, you can go to waypointplus.com and subscribe. Not only do you get access to our premium feed, but you're also helping support Waypoint and everything else we do here. And if you want to show not just support, but zeal, go to waypointgeneralstore.com and buy some of our fine Waypoint merch, like our 6th anniversary shirt or poster. Our theme music is by Bowen. The track is Miss You off the EP Pale Machine. Learn more at waypoint.zone/BOEN. For now, we're calling time on this Tuesday. We will talk to you again on Friday. Until then, fuck capitalism. Go home. And we're back. Patrick, okay. it's sports segment time. You have the floor.
All right, Rob. So you watched the game?
Highlights only.
Okay. It was an interesting game. It has resulted in the fan base being in a weird place. I couldn't have been happier with the outcome.
So to be clear,
game.
The Bears appeared to be dominating that game for a minute. And then
in the third quarter, the first half, no one was doing much of anything. And then to close out the half, and in the third quarter, Fields was lighting it up. The defense, which basically doesn't exist, was doing just enough. There was a point towards the end of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth, and it was 24-10, where it's like, okay, like this is just where you run the ball and just try and mitigate mistakes on defense, and you're probably going to get out of here, score 30 points, everyone goes home happy. The defense gets screwed on a couple of calls, and because they are such a bad defense, like they don't have room for error. So when you have a call not go your way, and specifically it was a call in which there was an interception that would have stalled out a drive, that, you know, there's a call that doesn't go their way, they score on the next play, and then not 90 seconds later, Justin Fields throws a pick six. And so it goes from 24-10 to 24-24. Right after that, when most Bears teams, you would lose all hope. Rob, I got to see it in person. To watch the crowd, to listen, to feel the crowd realize that the scramble is going to the house. It reminds me of like the Hester days of just anything can happen, and you're not surprised, but you're delighted when it's a home run. And to like, people were I was hugging people. Everyone was just so happy. And this happens immediately after a disastrous play, which is itself an encouraging sign and somebody that can shake off an obviously shitty play and just move on and do something special the next. Cairo Santos, probably the most consistent player on this team in the last 5 years, misses just a fluke extra point. As soon as it happened, I turned to my buddy and was like, we're losing by a point. That is just what is going to happen. And they did, and the Bears were in a position where they had 2 minutes on the clock, 3 timeouts, and you know, not much happened. That was the end of the game. I was happy. I came out of that like buzzing. The stadium was buzzing. All everyone wanted to talk about were the Justin Fields highlights. And then, you know, I didn't watch much of football on Sunday because I was at the stadium, and then it was a pain in the butt to get home. By the time I got home, I was tired and pretty much went to bed. And wake up kind of catching up, like, what's the move? People were like, Fields. And it seems like there's now a split. And the reason I bring this up is because we're in an interesting moment in the season. And I think anyone that has watched a bad team that you have some excitement for has experienced this, where like, would I have been upset if the Bears won? No. Am I happier as in terms of the big picture, more strategically, that they have a slightly better draft pick? They call it a moral victory. You lost, but you won in a different way. We've experienced a number of these recently. I was happy with that. I've been okay if Justin Fields got that big win. I think that would have been development in a different way. But there seems to be like some real crisis among, like, you have media members, even ones that, Rob, you and I quite like on the Hogan Johns podcast, like, wow, they just don't know how to close out a game. And it's like, buddy, that's not what I've seen when I've been watching this team this season. I see a Herculean effort by a singularly superstar level player putting an entire team on his back and being failed constantly. And I would like that guy to get a W, but I'm also not going to knock him when he doesn't put together the 2-minute drive because his wide receivers can't get any separation.
Yeah, I think, losing seasons are tough to endure, for sure. I do think it has been so clear that, teams generally don't tank from the standpoint of they're actively trying to not win on the field, but like organizations tank. Mm-hmm. And once the Bears, basically auctioned off their defense for picks and parts, that was a clear indicator that the objective, the understanding of the Bears front office is that the wins they could buy this season are too expensive for what they will cost in terms of like opportunities down the road. And so I do tend to like look at games like yesterday pretty philosophically, right? Of just like, look, they like the Bears, that team is out there still trying to win. And it does suck to see them like, try so hard and come short like that. But at the same time, like organizationally, this team is designed to
they put up the white flag
offense.
Yeah, all the things they were talking about, all the criticism the Bears took, somewhat rightly of, hey, you've got this young quarterback, like put something around him. And the Bears basically said, prove it. Prove that there should be things around you, which, can feel cruel for a second-year player who got dumped into an awful situation. But then everything, like, what has he done? What has he done? He's proved it, right? Like,
well, that's the other thing is like, he's a player that maybe the Bears can't break. That's the other wild thing here is like, we have seen the Bears break players, break quarterbacks in particular. Fields, I don't think anybody would have been surprised if he just like lost all his confidence in game in the face of what he's been dealing with. And I was really worried that was what the story of the season was going to be, is that as part of the rebuild, they were also basically going to walk away from Fields, at the end of this. And instead, it is clear that no matter what surrounds him, he is going to try and rise to the occasion and has enough talent that he appears to be able to do that. So that does mean like, I remember during the first Packers game where they just got demolished earlier this season, I think it was on Sunday night, Collinsworth was saying, like, you have to remember, this team the Bears have on the field costs $100 million less than what the Packers currently have on the field. That is a tremendous amount of money. Like, effectively, the Bears are burning a lot of money to just like close out some bad contracts, and they have dealt a lot of people away to discharge some obligations and get picks. And like next year, it could be a very different team. That's the weird thing. Like, I've never had confidence in a Bears front office to like choose good free agents or like draft particularly well. Even though I know that like Pace had a decent draft record, but you know what I mean? Like, right. I didn't have much confidence in the Bears.
It didn't feel like it was a plan. Even if you got some good players, it never felt like there is a blueprint for what's going forward. There is an obvious roadmap for what is this team going to be in 2 years. And that's the difference here, is maybe that was going to be without Fields, but I think now very clearly, like, there's not a chance they move on from him. Like, he is going to be.
He's made your team nationally relevant when it has not been. Like,
they're scoring 30 points. Like,
they're talking about him in other games. I was watching the Vikings game, and they just had a whole aside talking about Fields midway through that game before it got wild at the end.
I'm going to get some of this stat wrong, but there was a stat that I saw or heard about this morning that was if you were scoring like 200 yards rushing, like on X, like over a course of the last, like the games where Fields has really taken off, put it all together, had roughly 30 point games for like 4 weeks straight. Teams that accomplish what the Bears are accomplishing on offense are like 40-5. And several of those 5 losses are from the Bears in the last couple of weeks. And look, what I mean by like, it's interesting as a fan that pays too much close attention. I'm thinking of it strategically, whereas, especially when you're in person, you're just emotionally invested in the moment. No, so are the players, right? That's where, like, when you think about the chemistry and culture of a team where, yes, you have a front office thinking about the long term, wanting to lose to get higher on a draft board, either to pick a player higher or to trade that away and go down and accumulate more picks and more players a little further below. That's important, but what does a win for Fields as a leader mean? Like, those are all things you're like juggling. And the Bears didn't throw that game away in the sense that they were like benching players to arbitrarily make it more difficult. You do that through trades. But I think you're right, Rob, that like part of what is, I think, really encouraging is that even though I feel for him, like he is putting everything out, every ounce of Justin Fields of what he has to offer at the moment is being put on the literal field. But if he was going to get broken, I think it would have already happened.
I think the closest was that Washington game. That was the one where I was like, if he's about to be done, it's right now. And he battled back from that. And
it started at the beginning, right? Like when he was thrust into playing after Andy Dalton tweaks his knee or whatever it was at, a couple of games early into the Bears season last year. I mean, there's enough distance that I don't feel the despair that I felt watching that Browns game.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, the man didn't do it. They had negative yards offense, I think, by the end of that game. Like that was about as crushing as a way to be introduced to the NFL as you ever will be. That organization put them essentially. You could have looked at that as like, how do you crush a player? Yeah. Let's just go do that. Well, and that's what they did.
This is maybe the sore point that is lingering with all this is where Fields is at right now and what that offense is doing. It really was malpractice to leave Nagy and Pace in charge for one more year, because if this second year leap was gonna happen once like somebody had figured him out and started like building systems around him, then we could have blown more things up a year ago and started like arming
this
for
team.
This
team would be like quote unquote in the hunt for the playoffs in a way that you were excited about. Maybe this more year.
So.
In a very weak NFC
board. Yeah. Like they lost a bunch of games because they couldn't score points at all at the start of the season.
They're losing games by 3 points, 1 point. They're losing one score games that it's because their defense can't do jack. And so I don't know. It's such a different place. Last year when we were losing, I wanted them to lose because I wanted the organization to fire the management structure. Here I want them to lose because I'm thinking 5 years from now, and like Justin Fields, defending a Super Bowl title in Arlington Heights, Illinois, right?
So the only thing that really bummed me about yesterday's game, though, was honestly, like we have enough Detroit fans who follow us and like weigh in on the sports pods that they were like, they're so happy because like we projected this as a win. We didn't believe the Lions had it in them at all. We thought they'd get run over, and like there's a lot of happy Lions fans out there, and like
good for you.
I can't even turn around and be like, well, the Bears really won that game though because they're going to get the better picks. I can't even do that. Like I was saying a week ago, I was like, this is done. Put it down on the books. This is done.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I was doing that at the game, 24-10. I was like, they're going to score. They might score 40 points in this game. I don't know if Jared Goff's going to do anything else the rest of the way. Not the case.
I haven't seen the video yet, but I'm almost certain that there's probably more Dan Campbell, big happy tears in the locker room. I
was not like that far enough down, but like my experiences at Soldier Field in the past are always buying the cheapest possible seats. We are always in the nosebleed. Like we're always as far up as we can get to make the math work on going. This time was a family friend, some client offered them some tickets and they couldn't go. So I was in the United Club, which is like a private entrance that goes into Soldier Field. And it's aesthetically, the place is styled after kind of like you were in an airport or something like that, but it's heated. Like, I mean, Rob, it was actually sort of upsetting to experience what it is like when you've got a little more money and you can, this can be what it's like when you go to see a football game. Like I wasn't pissing in a trough,
dude,
which is most of my experience at Soldier Field.
I was really shaken by a year when the Kings were really bad, and I went. I was like, yeah, it's just cheap to get like some of the best seats in the Staples Center. I'm just gonna go splurge for that, and it was like, what if you watched what if your entire like seating area was basically the inside of like a high-end limousine?
Yeah.
And I was like, this is weird and good. I like it.
I did like it, but it was I was to my money. I'm so glad my wife didn't come with, because if she knew this was possible, like I'd have to pay for these tickets, and I don't want to do that. We're going back to the nosebleeds.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, the Bills Vikings game was one of the wildest things I've ever seen. Like,
I only saw the end of it. I saw Allen throw the like really errant pass in the red zone. He did 2 of those in that game.
Yeah,
right?
he did. Like, he gave
concerning.
That game away. He's really regressed in terms of like the decisions he's made. But no, the thing that was really wild was, one, Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson appear to have, like, you know, Kirk Cousins is a known quantity. You know, like his ceiling is neither high nor low, etc. But he appears to have a connection with Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson seems like an amazing wide receiver. He was making, he put in one of the most dominant performances I've ever seen. The entire like game tying drive, or would have been like the game tying drive, unfolded with him. Basically, like, Cousins was going to throw it to him again and again and again, and just like these go up and get it type passes. Could anyone stop him? The answer was no. Like, the answer was they could not. It was clear the ball was going to him. Did not matter. He was going to haul these things in. There was one where it basically looked like it was supposed to be a pick. It was thrown high over his head. He gets one arm up in between the defender's arms as the guy's hands are closing on the ball, and just one hand as he's falling to the ground rips it from that dude's hands and like tucks it into his chest and completes the catch, all in like the split second before like gravity brings him back down. It was unreal. But the Vikings didn't get in to the end zone on that drive. They did everything but like get into the end zone, tie the game. They try a quarterback sneak. Kirk Cousins comes up like literally inches short, and that's it. That's the game. That should be done. And then the Bills get the ball back, and I don't think I've ever seen this happen. It's a fumbled snap that they lose completely cleanly. It just like, just bounces right out of Allen's hands behind him into the end zone. And this is key because you can't advance the ball on a fumble. But if it is a fumble and it's fumbled in the end zone, once a defender gets possession of it, that is a touchdown. And that's how the Vikings tied that game. Like, literally on the 6-inch yard line, basically, they end up like recovering a fumble for a touchdown and tying the game, sending it to overtime. And then they had another decent drive and got a field goal. But like the swings of fortune, like the last like 3 minutes of the fourth quarter in that game, I swear it felt like it took an hour, and a good hour to play, with the number of things that had to be reviewed, timeouts, these drives. It was incredible stuff. Like just a ridiculous game. Football is magical. I didn't see as much as I would have liked, because there's also a really good F1 race, and it was an F1 race that, man, I was sitting there, I was like, man, I wish Cado could be watching this. It was the most like, hey, do you want to see like motorsports as strategy game and like teams adapting to weird luck of the draw type stuff? It was that race. It was the most motorsport manager ass race that I've seen in ages. And so that like it added up to being a great day of sports. Do you want to hear the most degenerate thing that happened during this whole escapade? I love degenerate things.
So, when the tickets were offered, I was going to turn them down because I was in Wisconsin with the person I went with, and our kids were up there. It's like, I don't know how I'm going to, I found out at like 8:45. I was like, I don't know how we're going to get out of this house, back to our houses, get all the way downtown. So I was going to turn them down. And so my wife turns to me and she goes, no, like, we'll figure it out. We're going to get our shit together. You and your buddy, you're going to the game. And I was like, boy, did I marry well. And she's like, I got good vibes. I got good vibes on this. And so we made it back, like timing up the lift. just in time. Like I'm looking at like how long will it take to get picked up versus how long it says like on the GPS to get home. So we can get like right in, because we had to get right in the cab to slide in to home to get there like right as like, and our Lyft dropped us off at like 11:51. The game starts at noon. So like just like beautiful, like got in, managed to get a beer right as they're doing the kickoff. But as we're in the cab, I'm like, I'm feeling these good vibes. This $60 cab ride, I don't want to pay for it. How do I do that? Well, let's do a little 2-team parlay. $40 on the Bears win, tied to Packers losing, which at the time that those seemed like reasonable bets, Rob, right? Like those seemed like that seemed like a pretty reasonable bet to make.
Oh, man.
I pulled it out of I call it my funny money account. It's PayPal. It's where like my eBay sales and like little Twitch money like shows up. So it's just that money doesn't exist. It's like doesn't take away from my kid's college fund. That's just like dad spending weird, when he wants to do something degenerate like this. Put down that 40. Put down 40 to make 58. And then all I did was just lose $40.
Wait, so that parlay only would have netted 58?
Right, but it would have covered the majority of the cab ride. That's all I was looking at the little calculator.
Hold on, but you bet 40.
I bet 40 to win 60.
The payout would not have been $58. It would have been 98, I hope.
Yeah, and so I got the money I put in back. Right. But I mean, like the what I was making back.
Man, if you had to do a parlay to get $18 off of 40, I'm like, this is getting pretty tight. Did the Fed adjust book rates? Like what?
No. Yeah, it would have paid out almost 100, but it was to cover the. I looked at how much the cab cost, and so I was like, I'll bet as much as gets me over this cab cost, and $40 was the magic number. But so then when the Lions lost, the first thing my bud said to me was like, "Oh, so much for your fucking bet." And then the Packers also won by 3, like at the very end of that game in the most excruciating manner possible just the worst. Like when they had that clip where Rodgers is screaming at LaFleur for like calling some play that he didn't agree with, and you could easily see like, oh, this could be the writing on the wall for all of this. Like, I don't know if you've seen that clip. I'll have to find it, but like he is screaming at him on the sidelines during some play. And then they go and win, and he's jumping around and he's all happy. Fuck him.
Yeah. Like, I can't believe Rodgers is so bad. I've turned around and I'm like, hey, you know what? Maybe Mike McCarthy's good. I don't think that's true. No, but I'm like, yeah. Anyway, great day of sports.
Great day of sports.
Good games.
Go Bears.
Go Bears.